So for our two readings this evening, you may be seated. I am going to start with a small piece of Esther. You are going to come to know this is my favorite book of the Bible. Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him a message for Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death. Only if the king holds out the golden scepter to someone may that person live. I myself have not been called to come into the king for 30 days. When they told Mordecai what Esther had said, Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this." Then Esther said in reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will also fast as you do. After that, I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. And then we are going to continue again with Matthew chapter 6. Jesus said, "And whenever you fast, do not look somber like the hypocrites, for they mark their faces and show others that they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you." So this Lent, we've been walking through Matthew chapter 6 together, exploring what it means to practice our faith for God rather than for public applause. In week 1, we looked at almsgiving, or giving without announcing it, and in week 2, we explored private prayer. And now we arrive at the third spiritual practice that Jesus spoke about: fasting. Just like I just read, whenever you fast, do not look somber like the hypocrites. See, once again, Jesus confronts the same temptation, the desire to be noticed, to be praised, to have our spiritual devotion recognized and applauded by other people. Now, the hypocrites he was speaking about made sure everybody knew that they were fasting, right? They walked around looking miserable, with their appearance all disheveled. It's as if they're saying, "Look at me. Look how spiritual I am. Look at my sacrifice." Now, hopefully you are picking up on the theme by now, but that's not what Jesus is instructing us to do, is it? Jesus tells us instead to clean up our appearance and let nobody know. It's a continuing pattern of giving in secret, praying in secret, and now fasting in secret. Tonight, I want us to focus much less on the how of fasting and more on the why. Why do we fast? What is fasting actually for? Why am I talking about it all, given that we all just ate a meal together, right? Well, to answer those questions, we need to go back centuries before Jesus. The Jewish people are living in exile in Persia, and a plot has been hatched to kill them all. simply because of their ethnicity. Esther, a Jewish woman who has become queen, although nobody knows that she's Jewish, is the only one positioned to intervene. Her cousin sends her an urgent message. Go to the king, plead for your people. All well and good, but there's a problem, which she explains. All the king's servants and all of the people of the king's provinces know that if anyone goes to the king's inner court without being called, there's just one law. All alike are to be put to death. And she hasn't been called. So Esther faces here an impossible choice. Approach the king uninvited, well, that could mean her death. But to do nothing, that'll mean the death of all her people. She needs courage. Not the kind that you just find on your own, but she needs the kind of courage that only comes from beyond yourself. Esther needed that divinely buoyed courage. So what does she do? She sends word back to Mordecai. She says, go, gather all of the Jews and hold a fast on my behalf, and I and my maids will also fast. And after that, I'll go to the king. We'll see what happens. But notice what Esther doesn't say. She doesn't say, pray that the king will be in a good mood. She doesn't say, fast so that God will help the king change the law. She says, fast on my behalf. The fasting in this case was a fasting of preparation. It's spiritual conditioning for a moment that is going to require her to literally risk everything. For 3 days, Esther fasts in secret, in her chambers, with her maids, away from public view. Then, strengthened by something that is beyond herself, she approaches the throne. And the king accepts her breaking of the law, and her people are saved. Her story is so much cooler than that, so much richer than that. But tonight I do have other things to discuss. Her fast wasn't about discipline, right? It wasn't discipline for discipline's sake. It wasn't about her proving her piety. It was about preparing herself for a moment that required courage that she didn't exactly possess. Fasting for her created space for God to do work in her, to steady her, to strengthen her, to give her what she needed for what was coming. As we gather here tonight during Lent, our Muslim neighbors are observing Ramadan. It's their own season of fasting. And beautifully and incredibly rarely, this year, Ramadan began on Wednesday, February 18th, Ash Wednesday. From dawn until sunset every day, they abstain from food and drink, devoting themselves to prayer, reflection, and spiritual renewal. And when they fast, they really mean it. No food means nothing to eat. No drink means nothing, not even water. It's one of the 5 pillars of Islam. It is a practice that shapes their entire community. And we sometimes forget just how much we share with our Muslim neighbors. I mean, spiritually, we're cousins. We worship the same God, the God of Abraham. Abraham, who was father to both Isaac and Ishmael. We trace our spiritual lineage back to the same patriarch, the same one who heard God's call and answered in faith. And we share this ancient practice of fasting as a means of drawing ourselves closer to God. In both traditions, fasting isn't really about self-denial for its own sake. It is about creating a sacred space, a space for God to do work, a space for our prayers to deepen, space for clarity to emerge. It's all about recognizing our dependence on God for everything, even on our daily bread. When we voluntarily set aside what sustains us physically, we become more aware of our need for what is going to sustain us spiritually. During Ramadan, Muslims fast as an act of worship, as a means of purification, and as a preparation for faithful living. The parallel to our Christian fasting is profoundly similar. We also fast as an act of worship, and we also seek purification and a spiritual clarity. Just like our Muslim neighbors, we are preparing ourselves, preparing for moments when we need courage, preparing for actions that require more than our own strength, preparing to be the people that God is calling us to be. This shared practice across our Abrahamic traditions reminds us that we are not alone in seeking God through just a little self-denial. We're part of this much larger story, this much wider family of faith. And fasting has been, for me, a way of preparing myself to do something public and potentially risky. In August of 2025, an Egyptian man named Ayman Solomon was detained by immigration authorities in Cincinnati. Ayman had lived here in the United States for more than a decade as a legally present person allowed to live here under his asylum status. He was a faithful member of the Clifton Mosque. He was a man known for his kindness and his devotion to his community. He worked as a chaplain at Children's Hospital, helping people and praying with them and for them, regardless of their religious affiliation. Well, after showing up for a routine check-in with those managing his status, he found himself caught up in the machinery of our immigration system. He was unjustly held in detention, facing a very real possibility of returning to Egypt, a place where his life was very much at risk, which is why he had asylum in the first place. And of course, the Muslim community rallied around Ayman, but something else happened too. Worship leaders from across Cincinnati, representing multiple faith traditions, began gathering outside the Clifton Mosque for prayerful vigils as an act of faith, of prayer, but also as a protective barrier to anti-Muslim hate. Atheists, Buddhists, Sikh, along with Christians, Muslims, Jews, and members of the Baha'i faith, the four faiths that worship the God of Abraham, we stood together, bearing witness, refusing to let Ayman be forgotten or have his community face this alone. I was there, in my collar, holding signs of support as a way of connecting prayerfully with Ayman during his detention. And each time I felt hunger, I prayed for him. Each time I wanted to eat, but I chose not to, I remembered that he was confined, separated, and suffering an injustice. The fasting became a way of bearing his burden with him, of staying connected to his situation. But it was more than just that. The fasting prepared me. It prepared me to show up at those vigils. It prepared me to speak out when speaking out felt risky. Prepared me to stand in solidarity across religious lines when some people in my own congregation questioned whether or not it was appropriate. Just as Esther's fast prepared her to approach the king, my fast prepared me to take actions that required courage I wasn't exactly sure I possessed. This was for a man whom up until that moment not only had I never met, but I had never even heard of. His arrest and the public attention it got was my introduction to him. Now, Amon's case eventually found some resolution. He is free now, though the scars of that experience remain for him and his community. He lost his job. But what I learned during that time has stayed with me. Fasting isn't just about my personal piety. It's about preparing myself for the moments when God calls me to act, to stand with the vulnerable, to risk something for the sake of justice and for love. I could have faced law enforcement, I could have been arrested, and I could have been on the receiving end of violence from anti-Islam bigots. But I was able to face it because that's what fasting does. It strengthens us where no one else can see, so that when the moment comes, when we are called to speak up, to show up, to risk something, we're ready. So here's my question for you tonight. What moment is God preparing you for? What situation in your life, in your family, in your community requires more courage than you think you currently possess? What action is God calling you toward that makes you want to say, like Esther, I can't do that. It's too risky, it's too costly, it's too frightening. Maybe it's a difficult conversation that you need to have. Maybe it is a stand that you need to take at work or in your neighborhood. Maybe it is reaching out to somebody who has been marginalized, like me, or speaking up for somebody who has no voice. Maybe it is just showing up when showing up feels hard. So this week, I want to invite you to take on a private fast. Not for show, not so others will notice, not even so you can feel particularly spiritual, but as a preparation, as a way of creating space for God. So what might a fast look like? It doesn't have to be no food or no drink. For some of you, it might be that traditional practice I just mentioned, or even eating simply on a day or two. For others, it might look like fasting from social media, from your streaming services, from that constant noise and distraction that keeps us from hearing God's voice. The specific practice matters much less than your intention. How matters much less than why. This is for you to create space, to acknowledge a dependence on God, to prepare yourself for whatever God is calling you to do. Don't make announcements of it. Don't make a show of it. Let it be between you and God alone. And then pay attention. Pay attention to what God reveals in the space that you create. Esther fasted in secret, and then she approached the throne. Our Muslim neighbors fast during Ramadan, preparing themselves for a faithful life. I fasted quietly, and I found myself naturally standing in solidarity with Amon Solomon when it mattered. So what is God preparing you for? Amen.